Asinivusele sinimukele masatla mahle lomhla ekseni kungumsombuluko sethema usinivwa kahle lomhla ekseni sethema ukuthi nibe nempela sonto lebusisekile nalephephile dinge amashumi lamabili nesikhombisa umnyaka ngo2021 is the 27th of December 2021 sekusele nje malanga lasihlanu kuphela ukuthi singene eminyakeni wa 2022 sethema ukuthi nibuya kukhisimusi lophephile nalo busisekile siyanamukela lomhla ihlelweni sikangeni nikito tindzaba tethu futhi namuhla sasibukena ngombiko losuka khona itiko letempilo Asikelangani la itolo kuhlele abantu labango 1013 kwatholakala ukuthi labango 62 banemkhuhlane yeCovid-19 labango 101 basesibhedlela bayelashwa kanti labango 1107 sebaluleme sebasekhaya sishiye abantu labasihlanu itolo emhlabeni kanti lomkhuhlane usolo wabhethuka selaba utfolile sebango 64443 lasebasishile emhlabeni bango 1277 bese kuthi lasebagome ngalokuphelele bango 295041 lese wenda 25.3% we total population kanti nje sisabuka wona umkhuhlane weCovid-19 umbiko uyaveta ukuthi over 6000 wama flights accancelishiwe emhlabeni wonke ngaso sizathu semkhuhlane weCovid-19 ikakhulukazi umkhuhlane lomusha hlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant ngisoke sizafuse ukuthi emavela amaningi yacancele ema flights awo azedwa kumuleke ukuthi inhlangano yakamhlaba yetempilo WHO abecelile ukuthi bamfu bachubekisele imbili tinhlelo tabo etokuvakashela lamanye emave kuzama nje ukunciphisa inombolo tekuthelelana kwamkhuhlane hlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant ke ema flights lamaningi emhlabeni wonke kakhulukazi ufake khathi neliva lasemelika likhanselishile ema flights awo lamanye ke abe delayed kuzama nje kunciphisa inombolo yabantu labathola umkhuhlane eCovid-19 kanti ke itolo ilive lase South Africa hulumende elive lase South Africa umemetele ukuthi kushone Archbishop Desmond Tutu ushone kane iminyaka lengemashumi la impica bekasola ke agula anamdlavuza welihlobo leprostate hulumende ke umemetele ukuthi ushone itolo ngitithuba tensimbi yasekuseni khona ngelisonto kanti ke tributes solo ayangena ikakhulukazi naye lo yebelebeka ngumengameli welive lasemelika naye kukhona la kushido la kuvetile ngaye Desmond Tutu Barack Obama uvetile ukuthi kuningi lamfundzise kona solo aphilile emhlabeni banengela bakushoko ngaye Desmond Tutu ikakhulukazi kumla ukuthi bekakhona ngesikhathi lapho kulwela khona inkhululeko even laseNingizimu Afrika kunengela bakushido ngayo sishito emhlabeni aneminyaka lengemashumi la imfica 90 years kulesikhathanyelo asibahlole imakethe esabene tindzaba tethu tekucala
Experience the Gospel of John like never before with Pastor Oksu Park, founder of Christian Leaders Fellowship, a fast-growing global movement of over 300,000 church leaders. 60 years of ministry and missions with 1,200 life-changing sermons delivered each year. Pastor Park's broadcasts have reached 1 billion people across 94 countries worldwide. Join him for this deep dive into the Gospel of John and find your way to salvation and the heart of God.
Asiphinze sinimukele ehlelweni Kusile breakfast show sitangwe 19 zabeni tethu Umfanenkosi Masithela uthi kunesidingo lesikhulu sekuthanazela live kude libe nekuthula. Umfanenkosi yabekhuluma ekhaya lakhe eMafini eMbabane ngesikhathi yagubha iminyaka lengu-91 91 atalwa lobe kuphinze kube inkonzo yokubonga impilo yakhe leyentiwe ngumndeni wakhe.
Umfanenkosi Masithela ugubhe iminyaka lengu-91 atalwa. Ethula inkulumo yakhe emcimbini bewubanjelwe ekhaya lakhe eMbabane eMafini, umfanenkosi weluleke bantfu labasha ngalokutawubenta abaphile kadze waphindze wathi live lidzinga umthandazo kulesikhatsi.
Tino tonke uNkulunkulu nawucela utethule kuye ngalokuphelele. Kude lehleka kude lokucela angeke kwenda. Lengeke uthandaze ukuthi awu abothumele amandla nathi enkosini yethu kuze lesizwe sakubona stopping lokwendebe nje ngajoni kuleli ngiyesaba ngikude ngikukhulu wangiphatha kabi kube into sasibona kuqala ukuthi iyenta naye sasiyakhuluma noNkulunkulu ngithindi live linekabi sicela sonke sihlale emthandazweni nemini uNkulunkulu utasiphendula nasonke sibhekisa kuye ukuthi sicela lokuthula kulelive sicela nokuthi angene labantwana bese bafundza imikhiba basetikolweni ababambe uNkulunkulu unawo lawo mandla kude longamesuku.
Umfanakhe Lerato Dlamini Nhlabathi uthi umfanenkosi ubafundzise kakhulu ngebumcoka bekuba nebuntu.
Sine siyabonga ukuthi usifundisile inhlonipho. Wasifundisa nje nokuthi netindzaweni tonke singadzeleli emsebentini singadzeleli.
Umfanenkosi uthi sive seMaswati asibumbane kude lelive lithuthuke. Etindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Nelsiwendla ngamandla nginambongwa Dube eMbabane.
Libandla lemasheshi kuleli Anglican Church selendlulise kulila ngekuhamba emhlabeni kwa Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Archdeacon Bhekindlela Magongo libandla lemasheshi kuleli uthi Tutu bekasibonelo lesihle kubazalwane.
Umengameli welive laseNingizimu Afrika Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa kuthe ngelisonto wakhipha isimemetelo sokwendlula emhlabeni kwa-Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Tutu undlula emhlabeni besaneminyaka lengama-90 kanye wabahlandlela ekulweni nekubandlulela ibandlululo eveni laseNingizimu Afrika lapho agcina ahlunyaliswe ngendondo yekugcina kutfula iNobel Peace Prize. Archdeacon welibandla lemasheshe kuleli Bhekindlela Magongo undlulisa kulila ngekushona kwaTutu.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a man full of love, indodza of humility. Abengibabe angumkhulu angokonke, not only to the Anglican Church but kuwo wonke umuntu and people of different faith other than just being a Christian. Simbonile kusebenta kwakhe ligalelo lakhe kakhulu ngesikhathi se-apartheid eSouth Africa. Sambona kulamanye emave lakho nakhona behamba around the world akhuluma indzaba yekuthula, akhutsata ukuthi tindzaba nathi khona atikhulunyiswane kuhlalwe phasi ti resolve ngekuthula. Abengavani ke ne violence Archbishop Desmond Tutu abekhuta ngisho bona laba lebebalwa nesimo se-apartheid eSouth Africa abakhola to order each time baqala kuba violent. Sineke ikakhulukati lesikufunzile kuye Archbishop Desmond Tutu nathi si7 sinetimo tetfu lesinato singako sikhutsata kakhulu ukuthi itimo lesibhekana nato indlela lelula ukuthi sisebenza sihlale phasi sikhulumisane lokho sikufunze kubantu abafana nabo boDesmond Tutu. Ngakho ke sithi nje emndenini wakhe kumake umkakhe kubantu bakhe I personally studied nemntwana wakhe Mpho Tutu in South Africa, so at least I know one of bantu bakhe nendlela lebekaphila ngayo.
Imitfombo ebetindzaba eNingizimu Afrika ithi Tutu besagula isikhathi eside lapho khona beyakathi aphethwe isifo samdlavuza wabobabe, i-prostate cancer. Etinzabente Eswatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla kanti itfombe litfolakele ka-DW.
Umndeni welijaha lelishe lashona endlini lebelilele kuyo endzaweni yasemseleni eMalkens lifuna imphendvulo ngekushona kwalo. Make wemufi Siphiwe Lukhele usola kutsi imvotsana yakhe ishiswe ngenhloso.
Umndeni wanathi Nkambule loshone ngemuva kokushela endlini emseleni eMalkens uthi kushona kwakhe kuyimbica badzala. Njengalokho abakholelwa ukuthi umlilo loshise umkhukhu lebekaze ahlala kuwo ucole likhandlela kodwa bakholelwa ukuthi ushiswe endlini ngaphethilom njengalokho bekathe acabane nalamanye majaha. Make wemufi longakathanzi kuvela uyasilandzisa.
Silo likhandlela nalamnyango kwavulwa abeka kwenteka atinathele yena kodwa zanga saka alalela emkhukhwini angakavali ngoba nami nangathi uthi okay ubangani bakhe uyile wayonatha bekabuya anathile bekangena alale avale lamnyango ngithi angisumvusa ngikhanze kuvalwe vele ngente tinto tami lengitendako nasa anako savukile ngidawubona ngekuthi lamnyango sovulile noma ngakangikhulumisi ngilenda sengathi ngitami ngikhuphuke ke ngishona wo so uhambile nathi ubhekele lenyalo nje longinangibathe ngiyabuka akusilo likhandlela ungumlilo ngibekise 3 to 4 bese ubuka lesihlahla lesingalendlela lesende ngayo kulikhandlela ngabe kukwaqala kwasisimba ngoba phela ngumuntu bekalala phansi lokhu nje bese kungasangeneki ungakhona na uwedwana ke ngikwatile ngikubonela la befika bakafaya bafaka emanti benta konke tibinzi temuntu tibone mathumbu noma labo kwabhoma lamazina ufebuhlungu lo mfana lo kakhulu emoyeni wami.
Umndeni wanathi ucela lisito eMaswatini lekumfihla ikakhulu ngokubathengela libhokisi njengalokubona bede maboko. Dzadze wemufi welile Nkambule uyachaza.
Ukhulu asathi nathi sibhekephi la lashele khona ngilave sicapha khona ngisathi nathi siyazana bekunjoko nje sibengeke sicela athi sikhona ukufaka phakathi.
Singaba nginombolo leya ngaka.
Inombolo ithi 76791612.
Phinze
76791612.
Umqhumanisi wesive kanye namaphoyisa aphindile Vilakati uyivumile indzaba yokushona kwelijaha lasemseleni lelineminyaka lengama-28 lelife ngesikhathi indlu lebelikathi lele kuyo isha ingcongca. Etinzabente Eswatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla ngisemseleni eMalkens.
Inhlangano yakamhlaba lebuke tindzaba tektalana nelinani lebantfu UNFPA seyinikelele inhlangano yebantfu labasha esifundeni saseshiselweni ngetintfo letitawusebentiswa bantfwana labangemantfombatane kakhulukati nabasemfuleni.
Njengoba lesi kusikhathi semaholide akhisimusi lekusikhathi lapho kuniketana khona tipho, inhlangano i-UNFPA inikelele insha yaseshiselweni ngetindlu letitawusetshenziswa ngemantfombatane ikakhulukati nakasemfuleni. Lewethulele tipho kube ngithamari Hlabathe egameni lalenhlangano.
As UNFPA, one of our key outcomes that we have as an organization is to ensure that the young people potential are enhanced. They are given the required support and anything that they need for them to be something in the community. So with this, I think it's just to say this is what we have come up with as per the request from the region and the youth council to go and assist and help, because in these times there is a lot of things that are happening.
Dumsane Simelane lomeleleke inhlangano yebantu labasha eSwatini uchazile ekuthenini bathi ngakubanjiswa ngetindlu letawusita abantu labasha ikakhulukati ekubahlomiseni nangemakhono ekuphila.
Isithele sibona namhlanje lapho khona abantu labasha ikakhulu nabantombatana anakekeleka. Mhlawumbe lokunye lokugcina nesibona lana is a functional development partner through the UNFPA, because I think, as we know in the region, the UNFPA has a very strong presence through the SYP program.
Etinzabente Eswatini TV ngilingithin Gule nasimuva shongwe senhlangano.
Libandla lekwamile Apostolic World Faith Church Kalihleko selinikelele abantu labadzala labangema-24 ngaphansi koluhlelo lwabo lokusita labadzingile. Umfundisi Mancoba ahlatshwa ukuthi babone kukuhle balibandla ukuthi banikelele abantu labadzala labadzingile kude kube khona nabo labakuyisa ethunjini kulamaholide njengoba labaningi bede kahle labangabanaka.
Ngaphandle kwekushumayela live lasmakathe lomunye umsebenzi welibandla kuqinisekisa inhlalakahle yalabo lelibelusile. Libandla lekwamile Apostolic World Faith Church Kalihleko likhombise lokhu ngekuphosa litshe esivivaneni liphe bantfu labadzala nalabo labadzingile kudla.
Libandla lekwamile namuhla lilende umnikelo nje ukuthi sithengele abantu labadzala khisimsi kuze nabo bajabule ikakhulu bogogo nabomkhulu nabo make ke la sebashonelwa bobabe bakabo nako sikukhanze kuhle ukuthi nabo bajabule ngalolusuku lolungaka lwakhisimusi kube khona lesibendela kona noma kungasiko nje lokuncane lokukhulu lokulesikwendile kodwa nje kunenzima lekutayidlala kufaka ekhathi boshukela kufaka tinsipho kufaka ekhathi emabhontshisi nemafutha ukuthi bamane bapheke lelo langa linye ngeke kufanane bantfu labadzala labazuzile bang-24 sebabonke.
Kakajane Dlamini lomunye lozuzile ubonga kakhulu kuleli bandla.
Mangibuka ke lesipho lesi bangiphe sona leli bandla lithatha umgamo lomkhulu kulokudla lokho kungathi uNkulunkulu uhlolethe inhliziyo tabo kuthi bathi ngokuthi bambamba ukuthi ngikangakanani ngiswele kangakanani empilweni.
Leli bandla lithi litimisele kuchubeka lelekelele labadzingile kuqinisekisa inhlalakahle yabo. Etinzabente Eswatini TV kubika Nelsiwendla ngamandla kunambongwa Dube Kalihleko.
Gogo Siphiwe Mhlanga lohlala nemyeni wakhe endlini lengahle ebagcobe noma enginini sewududane nokuthi ahlale endlini lesesimeni lesikahle. Lokhu kungenca yenhlangano lenishali bitwa ngekuthi Only God Knows lemakhela indlu emafutheni. Umsunguli walenhlangano uthi inhlangano yabo itele kutosita labakhulile nalabakhubatekile noko idzinga kubanjiswa sive ekwenteni lokhu.
Noma inhlangano lebitwa ngekuthi Only God Knows Charity Organization inetinyanga letibalelwa kuletimbili ikhona seyivele icalile kusita sive njengobe seyiya ngasemaphethelweni ekwakhela Gogo Siphiwe Mhlanga indlu. Gogo Siphiwe uhlala nemyeni wakhe endlini lengahle ibagcobe noma nini emafutheni.
Iyanetha baba ukude nje mathayila lapha edulubele kuyavuda balinako nalesikhathi kuhusha mina angikho ukuthi ngitawukhona kuphuma la kulendlu ngoba kudela ngidawubalekela khona imali lebehle ngenako ngilena le mali belisiyihola kubogogo kude lesikwendako ngitandla.
Umsunguli nemcondzisi walenhlangano Colani Kambule uthi lenhlangano wayicala ngobe uyabati buhlungu bekukhula ungenalutho. Kambule uthi basita bogogo nalabakhubatekile ngekusitwa tinhlangano nalabanye bantfu. Kambule uyachaza ngelusito labalunika Gogo Siphiwe.
Asikhanda kuzivele simo asisiso lesikahle ikakhulu kumkhulu namake ngoba imali nje labayithola bathola le mali labaphiwa ingwenyama yona. Cha sifike kuleli khaya sisibukele simo sase sesihlaba umkhosi sahlaba inyanza lezweni semaswati onke kungukuthi sicela asithengele imaterial yaleli phahla lelo. Lokubona nje kunemhlaba lapha lomhlaba lona yombili le sinikwe sive sasemafutheni sasidonectela ubona nje na semende lo myelo leshumi MP yasemafutheni isiphile sisemende lolishumi nesive sesemafutheni seta sibambisa ngemandla asibhadali sifike ndisona sisebende namahala umsebenzi organization bhuti ngabala nasengcolweni kunamake lokhubatekile wakamabuza nayo iyazama ukuthi kube khona le mendelako njengayitolo nje besendele ekhisimusi sambe nababencumalo.
Ngambule uthi badzinga imali lecishe ifike ku-7,000 emalangeni kucedzela le ndlu yagogo Siphiwe bamakhele nendlu lencane. Labafise kusita lenhlangano nalogogo bangashayela inombolo lethi 7871 9004 7871 9004. Ndzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Themkosi Mavimbela emafutseni.
Sihlalo welibandla lelilwane kwanza komkhuhlane i-COVID-19 emasonweni Bishop Samson Hlachwako sawuyale emabandla ukuthi angatendi tinkonzo tekujuba umnyaka njengoba lokhu kungabhebhetela umkhuhlane i-COVID-19. Hlachwako abekhuluma kalihleko lapho wacizelele khona ukuthi lo mkhuhlane useyingoti ngako libandla linensayeya yekwenta sonke isiciniseko sokuthi isive siyaphepha kulamaholide.
Hulumende wakuleli usengakayivumeli imilinzelo kwekuthi bekhona kuvikela kwanza kwemkhuhlane i-COVID-19. Sihlalo welibandla lelilwane kwanza kwalomkhuhlane emabandleni Bishop Samson Hlachwako sewugcizelele kwekuthi emakholwa akawulandzelele umnyalo wahulumende nakulamaholide.
Siyabacela abazalwane sisaye kujubeni umnyaka. Asingendluli la ukuthi sekuphelile. Sawubonga kakhulu sibonge uNkulunkulu. Thineke emabandla kamoya. Siye sibambe letinkonzo ebusuku nasijuba lo mnyaka siphume emasontweni sibe ngaphandle sihlabele sithandaze sibonge uNkulunkulu ukuthi sangene eminyakeni nakushadwe lufu nje siyawudumisa ngaphandle songane kodwa lo mnyaka ophela sikakwendi nalonyaka ngeke sikwende solo simile bazalwane lokho siyakucela singaqali nje silindele vele silalele baka health silalele lo hulumende ngoba sithandaza ndangamandla ukuthi umnyaka lodako fane uNkulunkulu asikhutele lolaka lwehle lela COVID-19 sike sikhone ukuthi sidumise lelusuku lekufa kwenkosi yethu Jesu Kristu nekuvuka kwayo.
Ugcine ngekuthi balibandla batawuchubeka nekuqinisekiswa kwekuthi onke emasonto ayayilandzela ngalokuphelele imigomo yekulwa nekwanza kwalomkhuhlane nakulesikhathi. Etindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Nelsiwendla ngamandla kunambongwa Dube kalihleko.
Umfana loneminyaka leli-15 unekugula lokungedayeleki lokumbangela ukuthi angeva nakumele ayochama umchamo uvele utehlele. Lo mfana uphinze angakhoni nekutithuma endlini lencane ngalokujwayelekile kodwa ukwenda emile. Lokugula kwakhe kumthikabeta nakutemfumvu njengobe labanye abantwana abahlekisa ngalokugula kwakhe.
Wonke umfana unelungelo lokuthi adlale, aphile aphindze afunze. Umntwana loneminyaka leli-15 wasembuthu ngaphansi kwenkundla yaselubulini akakhoni kusebenzisa lamalungelo lawa ngalokugcwele ngenxa yokugula ladalwa nako. Lo mntwana longeke asholi igama lakhe unenkinga yokuthi angakhoni kuva nakufanele ayochama. Umchamo uvele utehlele kanzi lokhu kuyamkhinyabeda kutemfundo njengobe labanye bantwana bahlekisa nangaye. Badali bakhe nabo lesebakhulile babuhlungu ngalesimo salomntwana.
Emathoyi akathoyi ahleli phansi umchamo uyayiphumela nje uyayichamela manje maphethe sisuke uyakhona ukuthi mama kuthi ngiyohlala phansi hamba mfana mohlala phansi kube nje nje sekube kungemanabukeli ke lefama ukuthi ungasize ngoba esikolweni nje nyalo anginawo la manabukeli so thatha ke intambo ayibophela empipini bese uhamba ke isikhathi ayesikolweni.
Make lo mntwana uthi bazamile tibhedlela talapha eveni kodwa lusito labathi lukhona lokuthi lo mntwana afakwe isigubhu lesitawukhongetela lo mchamo. Inkinga yaloku labayibonako ukuthi lo mntwana uthanza kudlala njengalabanye bantwana lesigubhu singasuke sinyomuke noma sitsabuke. Lusito lolunye beluthembisa beluseveni labomakhelwane eNingizimu Afrika noko timali atisavumi.
Engwelezana bafike bathi engwelezana lo mntwana akekho lo dokotela wakhe sebampenshela ngase ngiyabuya ke bathi bazangifonela masabuyile lo munye mathi bafika ke mase bangifonela sengilakhaya kodwa ke emalangane nje ngathi athe caca mase bangifonela bakhala ukuthi angisenamali angisenani kodwa ke ngiyafisa ukuthi ngiphinde ngijike ngibuye kuye base bathi hayi ke njengoba uthi awusenako ukuhamba sengifele ngahlala phansi ke
Labafise kuhlangabeta lo mntwana ngelusito bangashayela inombolo lethi 76970828 76970828. Ndzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Jamkosi Mavimbela ngiselibulini.
Kwezemidlalo tingijimita kuleli lethamba embili ku-100 meters kanye na-200 meters kubesilisa nebesifazane lekunguSibusiso Mathenjwa kanye naBongiwe Mahlalela bathi umnyaka wa 2021 kube ngumnyaka lomuhle kubo njengaloku bakhonile kufinyelela etinveni letinengi lebatifisile.
Ngo-2021 kulabaningi betemidlalo akwabike ngilophithitelako njengaloko kube nemidlalo lemincane kepha-ke kubo Sibusiso Mathenjwa lodlala wagcama imidlalo nemo-Olympics uthi kuba bede kwale midlalo leminingi kumsitile njengaloko athi ukhonile ukuthi abe nesikhathi lesanele sekutilungiselela.
So phela nje umnyaka ngisho ukuthi so far mina on my side despite the pandemic le coronavirus ukuthi besenta ukuthi singakhoni ukugijima eEurope maybe some of the countries around the world because of being restricted. So ngisho ukuthi kungisebentele mina because I had time to prepare enough to compete, especially at the game. So in total nje ngisho ukuthi ube ngumnyaka lomuhle kakhulu.
Kanibonge Mahlalela yena kulomnyaka uhambe embili emidlalweni yema-National Champions kuyi-100 meters ne-200 meters lapho wathethe khona sicoco sekuba ngigijimi lihamba embili efeni.
Kube ngumnyaka lo right, lo challenging, but ke I'm happy because I've maintained be the national champion in 100 meters and 200 meters this year, and ngathola ema-PBs lang to both event ka 100 na 200, and ngaphose ngaqualify for ama-African champs kwala kancane. The qualifying time was 24:24, mina ngashaya 24:3 kwala kancane babese sebawakhansela seka next year eMauritius ngaJune.
Letingijimi tithi setibuka umnyaka wa 2022 njengaloku kunemidlalo lemikhulu lokumele tiyingenele emhlabeni. Lebike umsakazo weSwatini TV kutemidlalo ngiphathisa Sibi. Kaloku
Anejele temidlalo siyadiphetha tindzaba tefu asibahlele temakethe sidaba yasichubeke nehlelo.
Nziki skim sami, mayingiyabonga kungadisa ngemvo lebeyingaze ibe yimfihlo kulomunye umuntu. Ungadise ngesimo sakho sekuphila ne-HIV. Mngani wami, yati ukuthi ngimi nawe. Waya.
Mngani wami, ukwende kwaba melula kakhulu ukubhokokela. Ngiyati ukuthi soze wangihlamula. Bunguwe bakho uyangikhulula kakhulu emoyeni wami. Ngiyabonga girl. Ungikhulula kakhulu kwathi ukuthi wena uyahlala unami njalo.
Girl, sisonke always. Kuphila ne-HIV angeke kulushintshe nakancane lithambo lwami nawe. Mngani wami, yati ukuthi ngimi nawe sonke isikhathi.
Kuva kabandi shayela 1212.
The festive season is family time. Giving and receiving all those gifts feels wonderful, and seeing the joy on everyone's faces. Most of all, I love all that food. Most people love spending time in the kitchen with their families preparing delicious meals. It's a time for lots of laughs, togetherness, family, and creating memories. Join me as we bring you a wonderful cooking show that will teach you how to make a 3-course meal for this Christmas. We will have 4 of the best local chefs to show us what they will be making on this special day. So, spend this festive in the kitchen with us on Eswatini TV. Do not miss it.
Mbukela siphindze sikumukele solobukela hlelo Kusile breakfast show sikumukele nawo losanza kusivulela lesikhathi sitawubuka yona iclip ya WHO njoba sihlala siveda ukuthi basiniketa the latest update ngawo umkhuhlane COVID-19 ikakhulukazi luhlobo lolusha lolomkhuhlane Omicron variant sasibuke ukuthi ingabe kuleli viki bathini.
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. The end of a year is always an opportunity to look back and to look forward. As we look back, 2021 gave us many reasons to hope. Science delivered that hope in the form of vaccines, which have undoubtedly saved many lives this year. On the other hand, there is no doubt that the inequitable sharing of those vaccines has cost many lives. 2021 was a year in which we lost 3.5 million people to COVID-19, more deaths than from HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis combined in 2020. And still, COVID-19 continues to claim around 50,000 lives every week. As Omicron becomes the dominant variant in many countries, all of us need to take extra precautions. Today, WHO is issuing updated guidance for health workers, recommending the use of either a respirator or a medical mask in addition to other personal protective equipment when entering a room where there is a patient with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. Respirators, which includes masks known as N95, FFP2, and others, should especially be worn in care settings where ventilation is known to be poor. However, we're painfully aware that many health workers around the world are unable to access respirators. We therefore ask manufacturers and countries to scale up the production, procurement, and distribution of both respirators and medical masks for use in health and care settings. It's essential that all health workers have all the tools they need to do their jobs: the training, the PPE, the safe work environment, and the vaccines. It's frankly difficult to understand how a year since the first vaccines were administered, 3 in 4 health workers in Africa remain unvaccinated. While some countries are now rolling out blanket booster programs, only half of WHO's member states have been able to reach the target of vaccinating 40% of their populations by the end of the year because of distortions in global supply. Enough vaccines were administered globally this year that the 40% target could have been reached in every country by September if those vaccines had been distributed equitably through COVAX and AVAT. We are encouraged that supply is improving. Today, COVAX shipped its 800 million vaccine doses. Half of those doses have been shipped in the past 3 months. Our projections show that supply should be sufficient to vaccinate the entire global adult population and to give boosters to high-risk populations by the first quarter of 2022. However, only later in 2022 will supply be sufficient for extensive use of boosters in all adults. So I call once again on countries and manufacturers to prioritize COVAX and AVAT and to work together to support those who are furthest behind. Today, the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization, or SAGE, is issuing an interim statement on booster doses. SAGE concluded that the focus of immunization must remain on decreasing deaths and severe disease, and expressed concern that blanket booster programs will exacerbate vaccine inequity. About 20% of all vaccine doses administered every day are currently being given as boosters or additional doses. Blanket booster programs are likely to prolong the pandemic rather than ending it by diverting supply to countries that already have high levels of vaccination coverage, giving the virus more opportunity to spread and mutate. It's important to remember that the vast majority of hospitalizations and deaths are in unvaccinated people, not unboosted people. And we must be very clear that the vaccines we have remain effective against both the Delta and Omicron variants. The global priority must be to support all countries to reach the 40% target as quickly as possible and the 70% target by the middle of this year. No country can boost its way out of the pandemic. And boosters cannot be seen as a ticket to go ahead with the planned celebrations without the need for other precautions. Even as we work to make the best use of vaccines we have, WHO is also working to identify the next generation of vaccines through the Solidarity Trial vaccines. The Solidarity Trial vaccines is co-sponsored by WHO and the Ministries of Health of Colombia, Mali, and Philippines, and aims to accelerate the evaluation of more COVID-19 vaccines to expand the portfolio and improve access. It's also intended to uncover second-generation vaccines with greater protection against variants of concern, with longer duration of protection, or to assess vaccines that can be given without needles. The vaccines in the trial were selected by an independent advisory group of leading scientists and experts. Research teams in Colombia, Mali, and Philippines began recruiting volunteers in late September, and so far, over 11,500 people are participating in the trial. So far, the trial includes 2 vaccines, 3 others will be included shortly, and more can be included. WHO invites all countries and research centers to participate in this trial. 2021 has been a painful year for many of us, but we cannot allow it to be a wasted year. As we approach a new year, we must all learn the painful lessons this year taught us. 2022 must be the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it must also be the beginning of something else, a new era of solidarity. We must leave 2021 behind with sorrow and look forward to 2022 in hope. On that note, I would like to wish all who celebrate it a very Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
My question is directed to the officials, Dr. Tedros, Dr. Van Kerkhove, and Dr. Ryan. I just want to find out, with the world commemorating 2 years next week on the 31st of December since China reported the coronavirus. Where are we as the world in terms of fighting this coronavirus and the variants? Are we beginning to understand the behavior of variants and that are we step ahead or we are still struggling?
Sophie, thanks very much for your really very good question, very insightful question. And I mean, I think 2 years into this pandemic, we are well trained. We understand this invisible pathogen that is, causing complete havoc in all of our lives. We have the upper hand in terms of what we need to do to be able to control it. We have tools that can bring it to its knees, that could save lives, countless lives. What is unclear to me as we enter into 2022 is how we use those tools to actually end this. I'm very hopeful into the third year of this pandemic that we could actually bring this virus under control. I think it is a formidable enemy, but I think we have an entire global army, forgive the military reference there, but I think we have an entire globe of people who know what they need to do to end this. I think we just really need to come together to do that. We have health workers who are exhausted, but who have been tremendous over the last 2 years and even before that, of course, in terms of keeping people safe and caring for our loved ones. We have a public that knows what they need to do. And in some respects, they just need to take some difficult decisions to make sure that they limit their exposure to this virus. We have governments that know that they need a comprehensive approach to tackle COVID-19. So I'm very hopeful. My concern remains of whether or not we have the stamina to really put in the effort to end it, and I think we can. So there's a lot more to do. I do believe we're still in the middle of this pandemic, unfortunately, but I completely believe that we have the power to end it in 2022. So vaccine equity and getting the vaccines to those who need them most in all countries must be a priority for every single government, not just some. We need to also be able to use tools to drive transmission down, because if we don't, we will continue to see the virus change and the virus threaten us in ways that will bring us closer to the beginning rather than closer to the end. So I choose to use my energy and the energy of all of the experts that work with us around the world to bring us closer to the end in 2022, and I think all of us can do that.
Christian, no, I was just listening to Maria there. I think we have real hopes of doing better next year, especially when we see governments like that of South Africa, Botswana, and the huge transparency that they showed in dealing with the Omicron variant, and the power of science, surveillance, and public health in Southern Africa has really given us real important lead time for the rest of the world to prepare for the spread of Omicron. We will see further variants, and what we really need is to have more sustainable strategies that are agile and flexible and adjustable and scalable, and that we're not lurching from doing nothing to doing full lockdowns. We seem to be in a cycle of hoping that it's over, putting our hands over our ears, and then going from that, sort of ignoring the problem, to shutting down society. So I do think, and I hope, that we have more sustainable, adjustable strategies. And we've seen that in many Asian countries. Many Asian countries haven't fully locked down at any point during this pandemic. If I recall, Singapore at no point has closed its schools, kept universities and other things open, and made the priorities in society for what society needs to remain open, for example, like schools, and then trading off where physical distance, physical or public health and social measures need to be more intense. So I do think we are not at the end of this pandemic. We're not even close. We have the tools, as Maria said, better tools than we've ever had before, thanks to science. We have a much better understanding about how to deal with this virus. But what we've lacked is that collective will across countries and between countries to be really comprehensive and sustainable in the strategies. And I believe that populations and communities have become confused by all of the changing guidance. we've also had huge issues of trust, notwithstanding everything that Maria said about vaccine inequity, which is probably the most horrific injustice of 2021. I hope and I pray that that can be improved in 2022.
With the Omicron variant now out, how much concern do you have at the WHO about the effectiveness, particularly of the non-mRNA vaccines against it? There have been some early studies that showed very limited effectiveness of some of these vaccines against this variant. How much concern is there, and do you have any more information about how well some of the existing vaccines are working against this variant?
Well, this is a question obviously that we're very interested in, and that SAGE, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts in Immunization, is keeping a very, very close eye on. As you know, they are the committee that advises WHO on the policy for vaccines, and they've been making recommendations for each of the vaccines that we have provided an emergency use listing for. As you know, the Novavax, Covovax vaccine was the 10th vaccine to receive emergency use listing and SAGE guidance. These are all widely used, of course, around the world, and it is important as each new variant has come along. One of the things WHO has done is to track vaccine effectiveness. A lot of data is coming out on Omicron, as it did for Delta. And it is really important to have a holistic view of vaccine performance and not have to make decisions based only on early data, which is usually laboratory-based experiments looking at neutralization assays, showing almost consistently all of the lab assays have shown a reduction, significant reduction in neutralization with the Omicron variant, which means that what it's indicating is that the Omicron variant needs much higher levels of antibodies in the blood in order to neutralize it. At the same time, there have been studies that have been looking at the other arm of the immune system, which is the T-cell immunity or the cell-mediated immune response, indicating that there is protection that is likely to be retained because the T-cell responses are against a much wider range of antigens on the spike protein, and many of those have not been mutated in Omicron. So chances are that there is still a good amount of T-cell immunity, which should reassure us that vaccines will still continue to protect against severe disease and hospitalization, which is, of course, what we want vaccines to do. Now, is there going to be a reduction in vaccine effectiveness? Is this going to be different? You mentioned mRNA versus some of the others, like the viral vectored vaccines. There are inactivated vaccines being used. And now we have some new subunit protein vaccines, which have still not been used very widely. They're just in a few countries so far. So what we propose to do is to really track the clinical data. I think that's really important, is we have to go beyond the lab and really look at clinical data. And WHO has also set up a technical advisory group to think about the potential for changes in the strain composition of vaccines. We know that a number of manufacturers are already working on Omicron-specific vaccines. It's good to be proactive because we don't know if we're going to need them or not. But in the meantime, WHO's TAG COVAC has been meeting regularly to develop the criteria for when a vaccine strain change may be needed. And if so, what should be that strain? What should be that consensus sequence? Because, you know, even within Omicron, you have a number of different sequences of all of thousands of sequences being uploaded. So the committee has to select the consensus specific sequence that manufacturers would need to use if there is indeed a need to switch vaccines. And that would happen if the current lot of vaccines are not providing enough protection. We also today published an interim guidance from SAGE on boosters. And again, there is now data, and SAGE has provided a lot of flexibility in heterologous regimens, both for the primary course as well as for the boosting. So countries that have used one particular type of vaccine, let's say a viral vectored vaccine, could opt to use a different vaccine, an mRNA or a subunit protein vaccine, for example, for a booster dose if they chose to do so. So there is more and more data coming out on that as well. But I think this is a time of where the data is evolving. We're learning more and more. It's important that we do not conclude that vaccines are ineffective at this stage. We've said repeatedly it's very unlikely that a vaccine will become completely ineffective clinically, because that's not how vaccines usually act. But obviously we have to be driven by the data, and our recommendations will change accordingly based on the emerging evidence.
I'm just curious, so alpha, beta, and gamma have been accounting for less than 1% of sequence cases for a while now. And so I'm curious, if Omicron is as transmissible as early data suggests, could it hinder those variants' ability to spread so much that they're no longer variants of concern? And if Omicron's overtaking the other variants of concern, but largely causes mild cases, could this be an example of what an endemic COVID would be like?
Correct. Since October 20th, less than 0.1% each of the sequences uploaded to platforms like GISAID have been alpha, beta, and gamma. 96% of the sequences available are still delta, and about 1.6% of sequences that have been shared in recent weeks is Omicron. We definitely see increasing growth rates of Omicron where it's being detected, and it's now been reported in more than 106 countries to date. There's a combination of factors that we think are leading to this increasing transmission. First are the mutations that are identified in the Omicron variant, and we know something about these mutations because some of these are present in other variants of concern. So for example, in Omicron, there are mutations that allow the virus to adhere to the cell more easily and infect the cell more easily. We also see immune escape, where we see increasing rates of reinfection in several countries. And then there's some preliminary data that's looking at the efficiency and replication of the Omicron variant in the upper respiratory tract as opposed to the lower respiratory tract in the lungs. So this combination of factors is likely leading to why we're seeing increased growth rates in a number of countries. In terms of how we classify variants of concern and whether we change them, we have actually been having some discussions about whether we need to reclassify alpha, beta, and gamma to change them from being called a variant of concern to maybe a variant of interest, or they become variants of monitoring, strictly because they're not circulating anymore, and because Delta has outcompeted those variants. The discussion that we've been having is how we reclassify them, and once you have a variant of concern, how do you reclassify it as something else when in fact the properties of that variant are really what allowed us to classify it as a variant of concern. What we've done in our weekly EPI reports is we've shifted the way that we present this information so that you look at maps around where is the recent detection of these variants, because we want to be able to put a timestamp in terms of what is circulating where. But I think the virus is changing. You've been hearing us say that Delta would not be the last variant of concern that we would speak about. Omicron is likely not going to be the last variant of concern that you hear us speak about as well, because the virus continues to circulate. I don't think there's any question of whether or not this virus will become endemic. It's certainly on its way to doing so. But endemic doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. Endemic typically means that it has a lower level of circulation, and it's really geographically bound to certain areas, and you'll see flare-ups where you see unprotected populations. And I think we're on our way to that. I don't think anyone questions that. But we're very much still in the middle of a pandemic. And we can't go into an endemic situation in part of the world where the rest of the world is dealing with this in a pandemic type situation. So I think there will be a long transition into how this pandemic ends, into how we get into what SARS-CoV-2 will look like going forward. It is a respiratory pathogen, as you know. So we expect to see some kind of seasonal variation, just due to behavioral factors, but we haven't seen that yet. This virus thrives wherever we allow it, and we don't get that reprieve in those summer months or certain times of the year. So there's still a lot of uncertainty of how this virus will behave. We expect the virus to continue to evolve. We expect the virus to become potentially more fit. Whether or not it becomes more or less severe, that remains to be seen. We expect to see populations that are vaccinated to have significantly reduced morbidity and mortality, reduced amounts of hospitalization, reduced amounts of death, and we expect to see flare-ups. It will depend on how big those flare-ups and those outbreaks are as we go forward, but they will occur in under-protected populations, people who don't have vaccine and people who don't yet have their full doses of vaccines. So I think there is some understanding of where this virus is going, but we remain humble to it because I think it still has quite a few tricks up its sleeve.
So WHO is monitoring through two technical advisor groups, the TAG-VE for virus evolution and the TAG-COVAC for vaccine composition. And at the same time that WHO is monitoring and preparing for any public health responses that are needed, also behind the scene, the regulators and the manufacturers are discussing the scenarios that if one day needed to be upheld, will be then deployed. So just to say that most of the time the general public doesn't know about the work that is done behind scenes because it's preparedness work looking at scenarios extensively, but just for everybody to be aware of that, regulators worldwide through ICMRA, the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, together with WHO and specifically the Regulatory Advisory Group inside COVAX, which is co-led by CEPI and WHO, that meet regularly with a cohort of those regulators for ICMRA. We have been, since the first day, discussing a number of scenarios if needed to be implemented. So the preparedness is there, but we need to go through the data, as Maria referred, in a systematic manner, not taking decisions too soon and certainly not taking decisions too late. And this is our concern as the data is coming every day. Thank you.
Right, Mbukele, it's 2 minutes before 8 o'clock. Bekutisebentite inhlangano yakamhlaba yetempilo WHO lokufaka ekhathi umcondzisi jikelele Dr. Tedros basiniketa nje updates, the latest update on COVID-19 ikakhulukati umkhuhlane lomusha hlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant ukuthi ingabe uhamba kanjani ikakhulukati emaveni lamaningi. Siyakhumula ukuthi amaveni amaningi sekabeke ukuthi bantfu bayawutfola lo mkhuhlane lomusha oluhlobo le-Omicron variant kanti lamanye emave sewagcinisa imigomo yokulwa nekwanza kwawo lohlobo lolusha lomkhuhlane i-COVID-19. Basiniketile inombolo ukuthi emave lamaningi emhlaba siwabike inombolo letithini kanye nenombolo tebantfu lasebasishile emhlabeni. Kanti nalo tiko letempilo lapha ekhaya Eswatini solo liyachubeka nokukhuthaza sive samaswati ukuthi siphume ngetinkani siyogomela lo mkhuhlane i-COVID-19. Imijovo solo iyatfolakala betempilo bathe cisisaka eveni lonke. Senivalelise sinishiye lapho lo mhla ekseni sesemothini bani nosuku loluhle lamuhla. Happy Boxing Day.